Thank you so much for the invitation. I will be addressing the question of to what extent is Turkey a possible model for future Arab democracies, working to establish systems inspired by the revolutionary values of freedom, representation, justice, and transparent governing. Those values were almost universal in all the cases that that we've seen from Tunisia to Egypt to Yemen, Libya, and now Syria. I will deal with three aspects of the relevance of the Turkish model, focusing on state and non-state ideas and practices, especially the dynamic between the secularist military elite in Turkey and the Islamic movements, particularly the largest, which is the Islamic Gulen movement. So with that, I will be discussing religion and state, the involvement of the military in government, and the third aspect, the relationship between the state and Islamic movements. All these issues are very important issues to the debates that are emerging in Arab countries. Of course, there are. I mean, the situations vary, but the lessons we can draw from the Turkish experience can be very instructive. Long seen as a westernized country in many respects, recently Turkey has begun to embrace other elements of its society beyond the secularist elite. Turkish society is becoming more inclusive, although there are still areas where progress can be made. But recently, the state elite is increasingly coming to terms that its definition of secularism can no longer be imposed on state and society. They're letting go, but only grudgingly. I like Jose Casanova's understanding or presentation of secularism and state. And I think he talks about three ways of understanding secularism: at the individual level, cultural level, and state level. At the individual level, you can choose to practice or not practice your religion, or you can define practice, whether by yourself or by others, in ways you see fit. Hijab, for example, can be seen as simply a head wrap, as very common in the practice of African American Muslims, or as niqab, the full face veil, as it is known in countries like Yemen and Afghanistan, or simply in terms of modesty, that can take different expressions, like covering the face, or not being flamboyant, or not wearing tight-fitting and skimpy clothing. So here you have a whole host of ways of looking at a very small thing of religious practice. So at the individual level, there can be so many choices. At the cultural level, which is a higher level of analysis, and given the global world we live in, especially for Arab countries, not only interacting increasingly with the outside world, but where in a number of countries, a good chunk of the economy is based on tourism, where when tourists come, they kind of represent a transient culture in their own countries. And although they don't come with political power, they come with money power, and so they would like to feel comfortable being and enjoying these Muslim majority countries. And so when you come to think in terms of what culture means, that's something way beyond the state, and that includes all the people who come in groups or as individuals with their own cultural practices. And of course, the society itself, even in those in Muslim majority countries, have their own diversity. In Turkey, for example, some people are very unapologetic and upfront with being unpracticing. Drinking alcohol, for example, I've had an exchange with a shopkeeper where he thought that he's a good Muslim, but if you drink a little, it's okay. That was his interpretation. I understand there are a lot of Turks who think that way. That is not the case in the Arab world, where if you can be drinking, but you conform to the cultural understanding that this is a sin, that this is not something good, this is not something you're proud of. Yet, even in the most strict Arab countries, there is a recognition that you cannot impose this on people who don't believe in your faith. So Egypt has 10% Christian, where alcohol, Muslims recognize that alcohol is okay for them. So there are different cultural practices in those states within Muslims, and of course with the larger structure of pluralism in a number of those countries. And that's very, very evident in Turkey. At the state level, laws and institutions can take on rationale informed by personal and cultural preferences of citizens. But to the extent that those laws and institutions are articulated and presented and defended in terms of a public form of language, of a language that can be understood by mainstream society with its pluralism, the better, the more democratic the state is, whether the culture is religious or secular. So this is very complex, and in Turkey actually there are problems with it. Turkey, as you know, the Kemalist project. It was a top-down imposition of secularist ideas that have had reverberations in Turkish society. The Turkish military elite, some of whom, I mean, Ataturk himself used to drink in public, and he didn't have any problem with it. But the religious Turks today think that the secularist elite is trying to impose its individual level understanding of religion or practice or non-practice of religion on states, at least state symbolism, and even on individual practices, like the case of banning hijab in universities. So that is a problem that Professor Ahmed Kuru called assertive secularism. Most Arab countries are not going to deal with this issue. Even the closest country to Turkey, which is Tunisia, has no sooner had bin Ali left than they lifted the ban on hijab and identity cards for women, and so the remaining issue is, and of course the major issue is going to be the role of Islamic law, the role of Sharia at the state level. Now this question has been extremely. I have to go very quickly. I don't have a lot of time to discuss all these things. This question has been politicized. The fact is, right now, there is Sharia even in the West. There is a growing tolerance and accommodation of Islamic finance in Europe and the United States. This is probably for the contemporary Arab generation that led the revolution. This probably is more important than questions of niqab and hijab and the penal code. People who understood Sharia in terms of canons dealing with the personal status laws or the penal, the traditional penal code, chopping off the hand of the thief, and those things. I mean, they understand Sharia in a very, very limited, way, and for some of the Salafis actually, that is part of what Sharia is. But for the bulk of the people who participated in the revolutions, I think they're moving more toward the Turkish understanding of Islam, which is more based on understanding the general values of Islam when it comes to what they mean in public life, and then applying them in a gradual, reform-minded way. Basically, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. If there are Islamic values that can inform your ideas about how to reform certain things the state do in education or economic life, then you can introduce this in terms of a public good sort of language, as opposed to thinking of, which is another model, of course, thinking of Sharia as a whole body of law that is used as a source of legislation. Some people wanted to make it the only source of legislation, although it has not even been updated to deal with most of the things that states do in contemporary life. So this is going to be a huge challenge the Arabs have to deal with. The Turks are dealing with it in a very nice way, which facilitated the impositions of Kemal Ataturk. Turks believe in what I call philosophical Islam. Turks historically are Hanafi. Hanafi is the rationalist, reason-minded approach to Islamic jurisprudence, as opposed to the fiqhi, the juristic, the analogy-based understanding of Islamic law, where when you think of something Islamic, first you have to start by how things have been seen in previous times by scholars. So the problem with this old legalistic approach is that especially for the current generation, the core issue they're dealing with, the issue of power and politics and state and participation, Islamic law and that legalistic approach has actually been such a colossal failure. Since the Umayyads established dynastic rule, there hasn't been a lot of scholars who dealt with the question of whether it is permissible Islamically to grab power by force and then basically give power to your children. And then when another dynasty or another family mobilizes resources to overpower your own family, then they get to have their chance to basically rule. And that's been the practice in much of the Arab world. I think this is gone. The legalistic approach cannot provide answers. The people, the young people, have not only asked the question but also provided the answers with their feet, with their blood. And so now they're asking questions of state-society relations more closer to the philosophical approach to Islam that is dominant in Turkey, and that is understanding the world through observation that is intertwined with your own values. And if you're Muslim, these are Islamic values. And so in this way, Islam comes into the public sphere in a more organic way. Obviously, Ataturk took that to the extreme and imposed his own understanding of Islamic values without regard to the fact that there was a cultural and philosophical and religious pluralism in the country he ruled back in the early decades of the 20th century. So this is going to remain a big problem, and we'll see what will happen. The second problem, it seems like to me I don't have a lot of time to deal with all of them, so I will just deal with the second problem, and that is, which is a hot issue now, military involvement in the in the state and in government. First of all, there is a qualitative difference between Arab and Turkish military elites. The Arab elites ruled by force, and now they're relinquishing the power because of the pressure of the masses. When Ataturk took over, he had all the power. It was not a popular revolution that led him to take over, yet he had a conception of how to structure what became called the Kemalist state, in which people will have democracy, but it's a democracy where the people are not trusted with complete power. So the Kemalist elite sort of appointed itself as the guardian of that democracy, and they have been intervening in certain junctures to kind of restore a certain order and then get out of politics. This has not been the way Arab military leaders pursued politics. Now they're retreating. They don't have a claim. They don't have a legitimate claim that now they want to lead the reform. They're not leading the reform. They have been leading oppression. So this is a big problem in using that model. The Gulen movement, which is for all practical purposes the social base for the current government in Egypt, has supported the Ergenekon trials. The Ergenekon trial that started a few years ago, well, in 2008, in which more than 100 journalists and writers are accused of plotting to topple the elected government. Gulen, who stays out of power politics, and his movement does not endorse any political party or political candidate, yet they think that it is their role to have their own say in things that are systemic. Systemic meaning how state-society relations are to be built. The EU actually asked for dephasing the strong role of the generals in political life. And so this is a failing model, and it's not going, the Arabs are not attracted to it. And it is going to be a hard sell, except through the current power politics, where the military, and this is very evident in Egypt, where the military does not seem to, although they're making statements otherwise, they don't seem to be wanting to leave a political life. People and different groups are playing cat and mice game with it. Yet it is going to be an issue of contention. The good thing that the Turkish military did is that they have written that in the laws and the constitution, their ability to intervene, and so which is why now Turkey is hoping they have introduced a lot of amendments to the constitution that passed in the referendum a few months ago, and they're going for another round of constitutional changes if they win enough majority, basically in 10 days, and so to that extent, in both cases, religion and state practices in Turkey is only relevant to a certain extent, and military involvement in government is something of the past. It is not something of the future in